So what we're going to demonstrate is called the barrier method. Now, the drainable assembly that the ASTM standard E2112 has been speaking about for years, that used to be part of our code, that's still a viable installation method. It's good for inland type applications. But when you get into severe weather, unless you do that drainable assembly 100% perfect, and I mean it has to be completely perfect, you will probably get a leak at some point in the lifetime of that window, which is why they've switched to recommending what we call the barrier method, which is a little bit simpler to pull off, especially for some of our crews that are out there. It doesn't require as much training. It's easier to pull off, and it is just as effective. And we'll explain how that method works. So our first thing to do is we're going to address here, we're going to take and address our house wrap and the cut on the house wrap. And there's a few things that we want to look at. When you install a window, a door, I don't care if it's a dryer vent, and you're using a house wrap or any type of an exterior water management, weather management system, there's three things that you always have to do. The number one thing is what we call integration. If you're going to put a hole in this envelope, well, we have to integrate the house wrap and the water management system into that opening. And then after we integrate that, now we have to flash it to make sure that the water and the air maintains the separation, that it stays on the outside of the weather-resistant barrier, and then we need to seal the entire thing. All of those must take place in order for this to be effective. So what are the three elements that we're dealing with? Bulk water, water in its liquid state, which is very cohesive, likes to hang out together. If there's a little stream of water that's rolling down this house wrap, or maybe it gets behind the house wrap, it likes to hang out together, and it will, in a stream, it will follow wind paths, it'll follow whatever decides to push it. In a 35-mile-an-hour wind, water has been seen traveling uphill on a vertical surface 5 inches. 35-mile-an-hour wind. Now, I heard you're going to be getting some 70, 75-mile-an-hour winds in the next few days out on the coastal areas. Boy, that water can really go uphill. So we've got to manage that. It's really important when you're teaching or training your crews, and I certainly hope that you have training sessions on your job sites. I've turned that into, when I do job sites, I'll take the youngest guys, and we'll give them all the training they need to be effective. Because if a young guy on a crew puts a window in wrong, I'm the guy who's got to pay for it in the end. So let's just eliminate that. Integration. I like to start at the top because it's the most important cut. I cut my top of the window or door opening completely flat, and then I create what we call an integration flat. It's a little V-cut, and I'll take that flap, and I'll just tack it up out of the way so I can accomplish my weatherization. Next cut. Well, there's a million different ways to do this. This is the most common way, is to come down to the bottom of the opening, come straight across and clear it. And here's the great controversy. What is this cut? What do you do with it? Well, most guys do what we call an I cut. See, to bottom, top, I. There's also the Y cut, the upside down Y, the modified I, the O cut. Too many cuts for me. I want you to just grasp why we're doing what we're doing. So I'm going to do what we call the I cut. And many manufacturers, you'll see, take the house wrap and wrap it all the way around to the inside and tack it off there. That's pretty common in a lot of manufacturers. But there's a couple of things I want you to be aware of. What would happen if you got a tear in your house wrap, or someone didn't correct this flap later, and you get water behind here? There's a very slight, but there is a potential of water migration behind the house wrap. Because we're going to do all of our sealing, all of our taping, up against either the house wrap or to the window and door. Nothing addresses this complete bypass in here. So what I've been trying to tell contractors, and the thing is that when you look at the manufacturer's instructions, they say wrap it all the way around to the inside. In a high wind area, you may want to do something a little bit extra. And the reason I say that is when you get those super high winds and the house is so tight, if you have a breach in the system anywhere up above this door, you could theoretically pull water and air all the way around as a bypass, even though you've sealed this perfectly. Solution, one of a few things. You can cut this right down the middle of the stud, and then when you foam it, you're going to create an air seal on there. The worst the water will do is get halfway into the stud. That's a common practice that we do at home. The other is to completely clear the opening, and we put a flashing tape around the outside of that. That's another approach to it. Or you could do the half cut and then tape that. The other thing, very simple, run a bead of sealant right down the stud, and then pull your house wrap to the inside, and it's just as easy. But just think about that air movement. This is a detail I would pay more attention to right on the water. If we're working out in the Hamptons, you know, right on the beach there, that's a very likely place where you're going to have water intrusion from that method. Inland a little bit, probably not as much. So just something to think about when you do your house wrap. So the first thing that we need to do before we install this, you want to just tack that back out of the way, and we can cut the extra off if you could. Before we even install the door, we got to check the opening. How is the frame on the house, especially if you're dealing with a remodel on a remodeling job or even new construction? What does the sill look like? What I'm looking to do is make sure that I have a perfectly level sill that this door is going to go on. So they did a good job. We're dead on. Now, if there's a problem at this point, contractors will often think, well, I can just shim the door. I'll shim the door up. You really can't shim a door and still have an effective weather seal. You've got to get this perfectly level. So do whatever you have to do to make sure that this is perfectly level before you even start to install the door, or it's just going to be nothing but trouble from the rest on, and it's going to be one of those potential callbacks. Because as you'll see later, it'll be almost impossible to get a good air seal under there if you've got the door jacked up on shims, because you're creating too many voids underneath. And with this system to work, we need a complete solid seal along the bottom of the sill pan. So we've got a good level surface to work off there. Some guys have asked me, well, what happens if it's like only, how do you do it if it's like 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch off of level? I've done it with layers of flashing. Sometimes you can take some of the flex wrap and put, you know, taper it off. You put 2 levels on one corner, and you can get a nice, fairly level. You can get maybe 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch out of that and be able to level it off. But anything other than that, you're going to have to do some kind of a repair to the floor. Check our opening, looking for plumb, level, and of course square. This is a slider door. It's not as critical as a French-style door. If this were a French door, I would also cross-check. I'd run a string from corner to corner, corner to corner, flush up against the wall. And what I'm looking for is that those 2 strings should just touch each other. It's called a cross-leg check. They should just touch each other in the middle. Because if I don't get that situation, you'll have a nightmare trying to hang a set of swing doors that way. Because what's happened is that your plates are not in alignment. Maybe the drywall guy hit him when he was bringing the drywall cart in. So that's one other check. But with a glider, it's a little bit more forgiving. So what we're going to do now is first address this whole water management system. So the first thing, we've got it level. We're ready to get started. And we need to create a sill pan. Now, the goal of this sill pan, because it's a barrier system, in the event that water does get into our pan, we need to keep it from getting to the interior. And because we're sealing it from the exterior, we have to allow for evaporation. So the first thing is a sill pan. And this, again, this is new technology. This is a flexible pan. It doesn't take a lot of skill to install. What I like to do, maybe you can give me a hand with this, one of you guys. It's got a split release. This is the flex wrap. I'm just going to take and release off the one side. We don't want to let this stuff touch itself. We'll kind of center this up. Grab a half of me. Let's see if we can get it centered there, Mark. All right. Hang on, I'm a little off my line. All right. Pull the split release off. I like to run that front down flat, nice and straight. You know, when you get to that corner, you can pull it and stretch it right around. Keep that tight 90-degree corner in there. And then tack it in. You got the roller there? Flashing tapes need rollers. These are called PSAs, pressure-sensitive adhesives. You cannot apply enough pressure by running your hand over it. But we want to roll out our flashing tape, get as flat as we can, and we can guarantee that that's going to be a nice airtight seal. Even if air tries to back up underneath, if that house wrap tears, it can't get past that threshold. This is completely waterproof. It's a self-sealing membrane. If you put a tack in it, it will self-heal. So it's ready to be set for the door to be set on top of that. The way we're going to install it, and I've always been a big fan of the pan, either the copper pan or even the lead. I didn't use lead as much, but we did copper, we did aluminum pans. I like that 3/4 inch upturn in the back to protect that oak. Love it. Because if that water gets under there, boy, that oak is toast. One way you can do that is you could put a parting strip and you can turn your sill pan up. If you want that 3/4 inch, do the same thing with this flex wrap. Put a 3/4 inch, or if the oak is in already, no problem, go right up to it and bring it up. It'll give you a solid, watertight pan without having to do all the bending work and the soldering and everything else you need to do. Just something that works really well, and it's really recommended by the manufacturer at this point. All right, let's dry fit this door first before we start going crazy with the sealants. We're going to do a couple of things. The manufacturer. This is a picture of the bottom of this door. I didn't want to flip it upside down during the session. Notice it's got reinforcement ribs in it. So where you put the sealant is really critical. There is no flange on the bottom of a door. There's no way to tape it. So the only way you can get 100% watertight sill pan is with sealant. And the manufacturer is going to give us a specification. So I have to hit these ribs in the exact same spot. Make sure that it works properly. Now, I dry fit the door for two reasons. Number one is some of the sealant that we have to do requires good location. Is that pretty much centered, guys? It's about where you want it? Okay. You know what? I might cheat on this one a little bit. When we get there, I'll tell you about it. Okay, so the door fits good. Do you think we'll be able to plumb it up? It's got plenty of room in there. So let's pop this out for a second. And in the manufacturer's specifications, they give me a couple of locations, 3 locations to look for on the sill. So the first mark is at 1/4 inch. I can pretty much eyeball that. The second mark is 1 1/4 inches. So I'm just going to mark on my sill a 1 1/4 inch line. I'm doing it in marker just so you guys can see it. And the next one is at 4 1/4 inches. Okay, so that's 4 1/4, 1 1/4, and the 1/4 inch. Most of us can pretty much figure out what a 1/4 inch looks like, and that's going to be the bead right there. So that's the sealant lines that we have to install to get this waterproof door. If I told one of you guys out in the field, listen, you got to put sealant on the bottom of this door. What's the typical application method? Right? Yeah, he's got it in the back, right? The big S curves. It's like, I don't know what that is. You know, they do the S curve. You know, it was putting up paneling in the 1970s. That's what we used to do, right? But the problem with that's a single line of sealant. And what it does is it transverses underneath all of those little open areas, so you can have cross movement of air. So these need to be dead straight. So they should either snap a line, mark it out the way I did, and you'll get the right location. This is our first step here in making sure that we get this, and that is the back. We got to caulk the joint between the flange and the door. This is what's called a non-integral flange. I can always have a hard time saying that, non-integral. It means it's mechanically attached. It wasn't manufactured as part of the window. You look at their 400 series windows, and that's an integral flange. That was molded at the factory, one piece, can't leak.
Casement window.
Casement window.
Yep.
That would be a typical integral, but most of the windows we get are not. And so we have to make sure that we get this sealed. Okay. Right into the corner there. I am getting old. I went to an electric caulk gun. Also, one thing you may notice too, these applied corners, This is a foam corner that's been provided with the window. We put it on the door. We put it on ahead of time. We're going to come across. Believe me, when I picked this up, I said, this thing is so heavy. I can't use this. After about 5 lines of sealant, I was like, yeah, I can use this. So we're getting that seal. Come on, baby, let's go. And we're going to come right across the top and do the same thing. And the nice thing about the gun is your guys won't be that cheap with the material. They're going to put the right amount on. So now you're going to tool that in. You're going to tool that into the corner so that we get a complete weatherproof seal behind the flange. So the next step, before we set the door in, we've got to hit those sealant points. So there's 3 lines of sealant. And this is kind of critical because we're depending on this sealant to be able to accomplish this airtight seal. I'm going to speed you up a little bit. Be here all night caulking. All right, going to come straight across the corner, and we'll follow our next line through. About a 3/8 inch bead of sealant, and now this 1/4 inch one on the front. The reason that I dry fit the door first is because if I did this first and then fit the door and found out that something was out of whack, I would have a mess on my hands and nowhere to put it. And we want to come up the side and right across the front. And this is what we call a barrier method. We're not looking to drain water out of there. We're looking to prevent the water from getting in. You guys ready to set that door? Okay, we got to do, before we do that, again, the perimeter. We're going to go around this entire perimeter. You got another tube ready for me? So I want to get to the inside where those nails or the fasteners might go on a window. There will be no fasteners here, so we're just looking for a good seal. We're also looking for squeeze out. Aren't you glad I brought the electric gun? Yeah, I'd be here for an hour. So we're going to set it in. Let's lift it up and kind of lift it over the sealant, get it about where we want it, and drop it into the sealant. We want to get some good squeeze out on the bottom. We should see some squeeze out on our flanges. And what we're doing is we're getting that nice tight air seal all the way around. We're going to shim the door first. Now, this is another area where there's a lot of callbacks in terms of operations of doors and windows. It's because of improper shimming. Now, in this door, there's 5 fastener locations. You'll notice there's no nail holes in the front of this fin because you're not supposed to put nails there. What typically happened years ago, some of the doors, I think some of your older doors might have had nail holes in them back a million years ago. And when you're trying to adjust the doors, if you got the fins nailed in here and you're shimming things around, you may end up pulling that entire assembly out. So we're just going to fasten it from the inside. There's 5 of these fasteners per side, and we're using these U-shaped plastic shims. I know there's a lot of cedar used out on the you guys love to use cedar for shims, and really it's not an issue on the sides as much as it is on the when you're doing a window. If you put a wooden shim on the bottom of a window and you got water coming in there, you're just going to soak it right up into the window. So this is technology. This is just an easier way to accomplish the same thing using a much easier method. Wow, you did good there. That's like dead on. Perfect. All right. So we'll check this side as well. And, of course, we want to retract this hill. Yeah, he's doing good, doing good. So he's going to get his shims in, and then we're going to do, once the door is in here solid, we're going to flip it around for the installation of the panels. So they're going to get this in. They've got it shimmed up. Can't overemphasize the use of the proper shimming. We need these doors to be completely straight. The mechanical systems that these function on are dependent on plumb, level, square, and we want these jambs to be perfectly straight, which is why you see he's using a jamb level. 6.5 foot jamb level. It's a good straight edge. It gives him an indication if there's a bow in here. I see guys using a 4 foot level, putting in an 8 foot door. I'm like, ugh, it drives me nuts. because the thing with a short level, I can do this. Sooner or later, it's going to read level. Oh, that's good, nail it. Because of the bow and the jam. The longer level, and which is why I use an extendable level as well, so I can get full straight edge on it, and I can see what the indication is. It's a much quicker way to see what's happening. All right, so we're getting ready to install the stat panel. Do you want to flip the? You want to put that in first, and then flip the set? How do you want to do it? All right.
Just wanted to show folks the clip system here. So with the A-Series product, there's a clip system that's on the top. That locks in this panel when you set it to the jam, okay? There's also, on the filler rail on the bottom, let's see if you can get a picture of this.
You can lift it up. Yeah.
You can see the break in the filler rail right there. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, you got
Those have to
cutouts.
be aligned to the clips that are on the sill, okay? So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to set this panel. Yep.
We cheated a little bit. We put a little mark on where we had to be because you're kind of doing it blind. You've got to get it lined up perfectly for it to slip in. And if you don't line it up correctly and it rides on top of it, you're going to be in real trouble because it's going to distort the frame. It will not connect. You won't get a solid connect on it.
So before we set the stationary panel, there's a little caulking procedure that we do in the corners. So just before you set the panel, a little injection there. Just basically on the other side of the where the weather stripping is mitered. Okay.
All right, we want to take you guys to the inside of the house now. So what we want to do is get the entire door installed and all the mechanical functions before I start taping the exterior. Because if I have an issue, if something's shifted out of place and I've got it all taped up, that's going to be a little bit of a nightmare to go back and correct it. So we want to make sure we get all our mechanical fastening done before. Well, let me have one of these clips. These aren't, you know, a lot of guys look at these and they go, oh, I wonder what these are for. I don't know. They must be for another kind of door. And they throw them out. You can't put any fasteners through. This is a whole drainable pan, that the system they have in there. There's no place for them to install a screw hole to go through our pan. We went through all that trouble to put in a pan under there that's waterproof. So the only way to keep that door, especially when it gets larger than 5 or 6 feet, you've got to fasten that threshold down. So this is a clip that will clip onto it. If you're trying to do this with a lead pan or a copper pan, it won't work because there's no place for it, and you'll have to go through the pan itself, which is why they're kind of recommending that we get away from that particular installation system. And so these will structurally hold, they're going to structurally hold the door in the position, and they give you, there's about 12 inches. You want to start about 12 inches from the end of the door and center one, at least on this particular door. The larger the door, the more of the clips that you're going to have to run across. And that's the solution to prevent that door from moving. We used to depend for years, we depended on the sealant to be able to hold it in place. On a coastal environment, the forces that you're dealing with in high wind are just beyond what you can believe. I mean, it can literally suck a window right out of a wall. And those are the things that we're battling against. So it's not an extra step that can be skipped. You really need to make sure these guys put these clips in. And you'll also notice that he put sealant behind it before he installed it. Another extra step to make sure that we have zero water intrusion, because this has to be a bulletproof system. This is probably the hardest part of the whole job is the sill. Making sure that we get all of that water management done correctly. The rest of it is fairly intuitive to most of you contractors because that's what they've been doing for many, many years. So our door's in there pretty solid at this point.
I would also say, Mike, too, there's a, if you're working with a remodeling, there's a remodeling clip that's a little different than this that can be used as well, that butts right up to your finished floor. So the next step to secure the stationary panel is the stationary panel clip. And before we install that, we want to inject some sealant in there.
And that clip, what it's called, is actually a security clip. It was actually an additional to the thing, but You know, you'd want someone coming up there just ripping the panel out or trying to pull it out. This thing actually goes down in and secures the panel exactly where you've placed it. So it really reduces anything on the stationary panel. As I had said earlier, you don't see any L-clips at the top of these anymore. Those are all gone. This is more of a security clip to make sure that that panel can't be moved.
And this is what this is going to do once you get that installed into the bottom of the filler rail onto the edge of the door. It's going to help you align the interlock weather stripping on the stationary panel as well. So what I did was I installed one of the lower screw, stainless steel screw, on the interlock, and I didn't fasten the other one, and I didn't sink it in all the way either. That way we have the ability to get this interlock in behind there, like so. And then once I get the interlock there, now I can secure the bottom and put a little pressure on there. You don't need to go super tight. You just need to snug it up. And then you can do the same thing with the top screw here. Just snug it up, get it in place, and then we'll start to attach the rest of the interlock screws. But before we do that, there's a top foam plug that's going to seal the top of the interlock to the head jamb. Just a peel and stick, peel that off. Stick it to the edge of the panel. I usually overhang it by about 1/8 of an inch, and then stick it right up inside there, and bring your interlock right into that. And it's a nice compression fit. You probably already noticed too that when we installed the frame, we didn't install anything at the head jamb. We did that for a reason, because you want to hold off on doing that until you set the stationary panel, so you don't put any pressure on that clip up there that we were talking about. And then the other thing is I'm applying these screws to fasten the interlock. You don't need to crank down. You don't need an impact gun. Just bring it in, snug it, and that is fine, just like so. Any more than that, you're probably going to have some problems with clatching. And clatching is when the operating panel and the stationary panel come together at the interlock. We've had some of that happen where we've had to go out and, fix because somebody really secures this thing too tight. And what happens is it compresses this interlock weather stripping to the point where there's no spacing.
It gets hung up as you go to close it.
Yeah. So you want to snug it up, but you don't need to crank it down super tight. So the next thing to do is we want to add a pile weather stripping to the bottom where that stationary clip and the interlock meet together. And this, again, peel and stick right here. Just clean away the excess sealant that's squeezed out there, which I did. And then you just want to push down and press in on it. And it really just abuts, it just fits really nice and tight right there. So that way when your interlock on your operating panel and the stationary panel meet, that part right there is sealed, nice and tight. So right now we're going to do the interlock weather stripping on the operating panel. And as you know, that these doors are not universal. They're a handed unit. So on the bottom of the operating panel, you'll notice that there's a pile weather stripping as well. And this interlock weather stripping, if you slide it down, it'll bottom out right at the top of that interlock. That fuzzy pad there. So that's how you can kind of figure out where that interlock is supposed to go. Okay, and once you've got that located, now you can secure it.
So we're ready to set that in now, right?
Yeah. One last thing we got to do here is this pile of weather stripping gets mounted on the top of the interlock on the operating panel, and this will ride along the stop on the inside. So peel and stick, just stick it right on there. And David, you're all set. We can.
Beautiful, right on the track.
You probably notice on the A series is it's a different interior stop. Okay, slides on a metal track. Okay, so it's going to be critical when you put this on. Is you want to make sure that this middle portion is tight to the operating panel side, jam side. There's going to be a space on the stationary side. So don't be alarmed when you see that space there, because the bumper that goes on hides all that. Okay. And one other thing before I put this on is you'll see screw pattern. I mean, there's a couple of different hole patterns on here. So if you can pick up this right here, this hole right here, in the center line of this metal track, that's going to be the screws that's going to secure this to the head jam. Okay. These other holes back here is what's going to fasten it to your framing. That's going to be your installation screws. Okay. So those are the small ones. Those are your installation, and I'll go through that once we set this. Okay.
There you go.
So again, the middle set of holes there are going to be for the 1-inch screws that are painted head coat to match the plate. And by securing that there, you're securing the panel, operating panel. So the next step we're going to do is now we're going to fasten we're going to use the installation screws to fasten the head jam. Now you notice I got shim up here. I'm not putting the shim where the screw's going to go. I'm putting it beside it so I can keep the head jam nice and straight.
Using it as a spacer to make sure that you don't have to. See what you mean about that, Mason.
And then just back it out. Pull that shim. You should have no shims on your head jam in case you get any type of deflection or whatever. You can go back later on and you can suck these screws back up and relieve that. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll just fasten the rest of it off here, and then we'll put the bumper on. Oop, I already got that one.
How about we just fill them in later?
Yep.
Get that one more in, we can flip it around.
Okay, and then we'll put the bumper on.
Yeah, we're taking this out in an hour, so I want you to imagine you put all the screws in. But you do need to put all the screws in for the integrity of the door.
This is the bumper I was talking about. So that goes at the end.
That's going to cover up that gap there we go.
And the last thing is your stop, your finished stop that goes into the splining material that's on the jam side. You're not nailing this on, you're just pressing it into place. It snaps right in, like so.
On the interior, other than the hardware, you're pretty much done except for one thing. What we're not going to do on this door, though, we would go outside, finish our weatherization. Remember, there were 3 steps. There was the integration, the flashing, and the sealing. Well, the sealing is, we've already got the sill pan. Our whole sill is already sealed with the sealant, but we would have to foam or use a backer rod and caulk to stop any air movement between this frame and the wall. This is real critical to it, is to make sure you have a positive air seal in here. I prefer to foam myself. We're not going to foam this door. We're going to just foam the window, but you'll see the process when we do the window. Let's just take you back outside. We have another run of sealant that we need to make, and that's for the head flashing. But typically what we used to do in the past is we'd put our flashing tape all around the door, and then we'd put our head flashing on. In this application, what we want to do is make sure that we get our head flashing. You want to put our head flashing on first, or you want to put it on second? Doesn't make a difference to me.
It doesn't matter. We can put it on now. We'll get it. Just caulk that in.
Yeah.
Caulk that.
So let me have the gun.
Yep.
This requires a bead of sealant along the top. You're not going to be able to get the camera up there. I'm just going to tell you about it. But what we want to do.
Oh, look at him. He's got it.
We're running a bead of sealant right along the top, and that's going to do 2 things. It'll bed my head flashing. We need a positive seal here because remember, water could theoretically drip down over the edge, and if there's negative air pressure in behind this wall, it could suck it back up. We're covering every single possibility here. The slightest little opening that could cause you a problem in the future, we're going to make sure that you don't have that issue. So we're going to bed that into sealant. And again, this is something that your guys may leave off if they're going to do an additional trim detail later on. I would check with the Andersen rep on that just to make sure that you need to have some type of a positive waterproofing up there. This is a split release. The 3M is a split release tape. The zip tape is not split release. It doesn't have a release on it. But what the zip tape does is they put a coating on their tape so that they can put it on a roll without the release tape. There's a disadvantage to that when you cross over tape. You don't get the same adhesion. That's why this 3M is really good. But I would suggest using that split release because you're not allowed, this stuff can't look at each other or it will just stick to itself. So that's why the split release makes it so much easier. So he's going to pull that head flap down that we installed earlier, and we want to make sure that we tape up the 2 diagonal corners. I prefer to use the tape that the manufacturer supplies for the house wrap, so you want to use Type-R tape with Type-R, whatever house wrap you use, and a lot of those are formulated to work specifically for them. I really like the Type-R tape because you don't need your teeth. All the edges are serrated. Now what, he's going to get that angle up, okay. So we're sealing all of those openings. So what were the 5 points? Who remembers the 5 points? What were the 5 critical things that if you miss one, you're likely to have a problem? Well, what are they? I need them in order.
Dave, will you give me
Oh,
my
look at that.
copy
You have a
of the
handout.
perimeter?
Oh, my goodness. We're cheating here. So step 1, right?
Dave,
Caulk your
Give mine in my
backside.
bucket.
I mean, caulk the backside of the window, the door, right up against the flange there, right? That's for those little pinhole leaks that could occur. Step number 2, caulk the perimeter of the rough opening. You can do that on the back of the flange if you want, or you can do it on the wall, as long as you get it in the right place. Step number 3, shim. Shim your windows. On the doors, of course, we're not going to shim the head or shim underneath the sill. The doors are going to be shim on both jamb sides. The windows will be different. Caulk where the exterior frame and the flashing meet, and that's going to be this all the way around here, which we haven't done yet. Flash over the flanges and the drip cap, which we've done, and of course caulking the backside of the corners on all the units. We go back to step number 1. So those are the 5. If you miss one of those, you may have an issue. What he's doing, he's using a much smaller tip on the gun now. We don't want to put a lot of sealant here. We don't want it to interfere with your trim or cause other issues. So you'll notice it's a very, very small bead that he's, oh yeah, oh boy. I hate when that happens, don't you? Yep. And he's going to tool that in. So are we done? Can we get our next stage going up here? We are done. So that was, you know, it took a bit. Now, I think we could have cut down the installation time if we didn't talk. But then you wouldn't know what we were doing. So that was the proper installation of the A-Series sliding door. Nice job, guys. You did a real nice job.